Okay, you're all set. Maggie, can you hear us okay?
I can. You guys are great. Thank you.
Can you just look at those slides? Does that work?
Yeah.
Aha, okay, sweet, awesome.
I was gonna say, can we look closer? That's great.
There we go. Awesome. See, now I can be confident that, yeah, okay. All right, hello everyone. My name is Laura Hutchinson. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. If you'd like to use they, them to just practice inclusive language, go for it. But in general, my pronouns are she, her. I am an allyship educator. So I just spent 5 years in student affairs, working in LGBTQ+ student support. I established the program at the University of Dayton, which is a Catholic research institution, research-based university. And now I do public speaking and consulting. So that's a little bit about me and my background and why I'm passionate, part of why I'm passionate about diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. To name a few other things, I do identify in the LGBTQ+ community. I'm a person who is disabled, and a whole bunch of other things that we'll probably end up chatting about. So today, I really want this to be more talking about the concepts associated with diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. We will have time to really focus on how do we apply this to the chapter level, but want to make sure we're all on the same page and introduce some content, some concepts, some theories that will be really helpful in just continuing this conversation about what does it mean to be actively, authentically inclusive as an organization, as well as individual people. So we're going to be exploring identity and what identity means and how that impacts individual experiences, leading us straight into experiences and how each person has a different experience. And the basis of working in diversity, inclusion, and accessibility is understanding that no one has the same experience as you, being able to comprehend how different experiences affect different people's lives. And then we're going to follow up with how do we put this in action? What do we do with this information? So first of all, you all have something to write with-ish, or even if you can keep track of 5 things, feel free to do that in your head. That's not me. So just write down 5 aspects of who you are. The first 5 things that come into your mind. What kinds of identities do you have? And we're not going to report this out. This is just for you, just a starter for conversation. Almost there. We just got a couple more. Cool. All right. So now looking at your list, what types of identities did you write down? Did you write down your gender? Did you write down your race? Did you write down your religion or your ethnicity or your abilities? All of those things that are on the left of the screen are aspects of social identity or examples of social identity. And we recognize those identities in ourselves, and that is how we navigate the world. So for instance, number 1, whatever your number 1 is the aspect of your social identity that you are most conscious of, that you probably have to think about in order to navigate the world. This is a room, including virtual room, of feminine presenting people. So I imagine there were quite a few of you who put your gender at the top because being a woman or a feminine person is marginalized in our society. Stereotypically, a cisgender man probably would not put gender at the top of his list. So as you go down, This list of things are the things that you think about most often when you navigate this world. So for instance, I'm Laura, I'm queer, I'm disabled, I'm white, I'm a woman, and I'm an Episcopalian. I think that was 5, might have been 4. But those things I think about on a regular basis. Now, stereotypically, I'm a white woman. I shouldn't be thinking about being white because none of us think about the fact that we're white because we don't have to, right? I've had the privilege of having really amazing mentors and engaging in a lot of education to make me very aware of my whiteness on a daily basis. And so this isn't automatically necessarily a list of your marginalized identities. It's what you think about the most. So every single person is going to have a slightly different list, right? And if you feel comfortable sharing them, we can compare and contrast. But if this is a list you want to keep to yourself, no judgment, no worries. Does anyone want to share, or maybe even insights from the list that you kind of made you realize something after you wrote your list?
I feel like I wrote down the wrong types of identities.
Say more.
So like I wrote down leader, goofy, caring, unique, and loving.
Okay.
Which are like not the types of things you think of on that list.
Yeah.
But like I was going for, what do I think of when I think of who I am? And like that's what came to mind.
So that there's nothing wrong with that. That would be attributes of who you are, but not necessarily attributes of your identity or aspects of your identity. But again, that's not wrong, but that also means that those are the things you think about when you think about yourself first, before you think of, I'm a woman, I'm white, etc. So that's not an inherently bad thing. It's just, I mean, that's why we do this exercise. Any others, insights from your list?
For me, I feel like different things would bubble up depending on the group I'm in too. Because like in many ways, like I work in a corporate environment and a lot of people think like me and are like me. And of course there's, all kinds of people, but being put in this context, it really makes me maybe reevaluate, or other things bubble up that wouldn't normally. So that definitely came up for me.
Awesome. We're going to come back to that. So perfect. Anything else before we move on? Maggie, did you have something? Yeah.
I do. It's interesting because I realized after I wrote them down that it's changed a lot. Like, lately, I'm retired, some health things have become, and things, I've been dealing with cancer since I was 26 years old. It was never high on my list, but I'm going through another bout right now, not too serious. I'll be fine because only the good die young. But so it's higher on the list now, and it didn't used to be on the list. So I have like leader and friend are on my list, and I think they might have been top before, but because of circumstances, they came after some of the health related things. That was sort of the insight that I got from this.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this list is not static. Our identities and how we engage with our aspects of identity shift and change the situation over time in general. So we're going to be coming back to that concept of this list in particular. Like your list of identities probably won't shift too much, though like a change in ability certainly would be a change in identity, etc. But overall, like the fact that you have those identities doesn't really change, but the order in which you think about them on a daily basis absolutely depends on your environment, on the context of what's going on in your life right now, what the last rude thing a person said to you, all of those things. So just kind of keep that in mind of, knowing that there are some things that you'll think about more often than others until there's something that triggers you to think of something completely different. So for instance, whiteness. If you didn't put down your race, you probably have never really been forced to think about your race. And that's a form of privilege. And privilege, I like to think of privilege as mainly just blind spots. You don't know what you don't know because you haven't had to know it. And so, just like I wouldn't have put white, I did not put white on this list the first time I did this exercise. But because of the experiences that I've had in the last 6 years, I like make sure it's in the top 5 of my list. All right, so identity is complex. No one person has one identity. Every single human has multiple dimensions of identity. And you see this model of multiple dimensions of identity. That's why I use that phrasing, because it's a really I love this model. It's very tangible. And yes, I know that's not actually how an atom looks in real life. I know that's not scientifically accurate, but it's a very helpful visual for how our aspects of identity interact, change, and depend on that context. So I have an animated version here. So at the center, we have who you are that nothing else can change. And that's really hard to identify because we live in a context, right? Our identities and the way we experience those identities are dependent upon how the world treats those identities. But who we are at our core, regardless of any other aspect of our identity, that is our core sense of self. And then wrapping around that core sense of self are these other aspects of identity. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is an example. But for instance, we have race, class, ability, gender, religion, sexual orientation, just as an example. So every single one of us has all of these identities, whether or not we think about them on a daily basis. We all have a sexual orientation. We all have a religious background or lack thereof. We all have an ability or disability. So what we do in this model is we have these little dots, and they're going to slowly appear on the screen. And if they're very small, they're there. Hopefully you can see them. Do I have a mouse? Can you see my mouse? Yay. Okay. So for instance, sexual orientation is way out here for this hypothetical person. That means that they really never think about their sexual orientation. It's not a thing for them. They don't interact with a world in which they have to think about their sexual orientation. Whereas this particular person, their race is very close to that core sense of self. So it's something that they have regular attention to, paying regular attention to their own race. So for instance, we've got gender, they think about it about half the time. This is not that prescriptive, not just half and half, but you get the general idea is that the closer to your core sense of self, the more that aspect of identity impacts the way in which you can express or live out your core self. And then of course, around that, we have the context. And that's where we look at how does the world treat this aspect of my identity? How do my interactions in the world impact whether or not I'm thinking about this aspect of my identity or not? And so the closer a dot is to the center, we call that saliency. So an aspect of identity that is something that you think about a lot, you're conscious of, that aspect of identity is salient for you. So depending on, again, we've talked about this, depending on different contexts or situations, identities can be more or less relevant. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of the video there, maybe. There we go, yeah, I can see my screen. So for instance, being a woman in a man-dominated environment, or thinking about your ability when suddenly there's a physical barrier. So like you go to a meeting, like you're gonna go visit another chapter and their chapter meeting happens to be on the 3rd floor of the one building on campus that doesn't have an elevator, and you had a back spasm 3 weeks ago. You know, just even that, you may not think about your ability on a daily basis until there's a barrier. Individuals, we make conscious and unconscious decisions based on our aspects of identity. One of a great example of this is called code switching. Code switching is specifically for marginalized folks who adapt to the dominant, adapt to the privileged default in their method of expression, mannerisms, speech patterns, rhythm, vocalization, all of that, even just behavior in general, of being sometimes even unconsciously changing your behavior to fit in with the dominant in the room. So again, if you are a woman in a man-dominated corporate environment, you mentioned corporate, how you act in a room full of women and feminine identifying people may be very different than the way you act when you're the only woman in the room. So that's an example of code switching. This often happens with people of color. You know, AAVE, the African American Vernacular English, is a legitimate language and dialect, but it is often portrayed or perceived as being less educated or less appropriate, less professional. And so people whose natural native dialect is AAVE will often switch to white speech in order to fit in predominantly white spaces. This can also happen for someone who is LGBTQ+. So for me, I have all of the rainbows, right? I've got rainbow hair, I've got rainbow glasses, a rainbow dress. I mean, I have the privilege of putting rainbows anywhere on my body that I could possibly think of, and I'm gonna be fine. I have that privilege. But if I were in a different situation, or I wasn't out to everybody in general, then I might wear a rainbow bracelet in one student org meeting and not wear it in my study group. So changing behaviors, changing the way you express a particular aspect of your identity depending on the situation. And the goal for inclusion is to be able to be fully yourself wherever you go. That's what we want for our fraternity. We want our students to be fully themselves whenever they are with brothers. I can tell you from my experience that the first time I really truly knew what it felt like to be wholly myself outside of my room by myself was with brothers and with APO. And so APO in particular has this really brilliant opportunity to really make sure that the people who we bring in, our brothers, our potential brothers, get to be who they are, because there is nothing more freeing than knowing you don't have to censor yourself. Like, not just like, there are things you should not say out loud. Like, that's not the kind of censoring. We have inside thoughts that should stay inside. But in general, like, just to be your silly self, to be your weird self, to be your neurodivergent self, to be your LGBTQ+ self, to be your person of color self, all of those aspects of identity, we want our students to be able to bring into the chapter meeting and feel welcome and included. Oh, there's this presentation. I did this presentation with a colleague in 2018 because that was the last time we were on campus. So we're going to come back to this sense of saliency. So again, that saliency is how much you think about that aspect of your identity, how important that aspect of your identity is. And again, it doesn't have to be static. It might be static for a little bit, but saliency in particular tends to shift as we go through our lives. So again, every single person has every single aspect of all of those identities, but the number of marginalized identities is going to affect how many they're thinking about at once. So again, it's associated with how much, not only how much we're thinking about it, but how much energy it takes us to navigate the world with that identity. So again, if you are a disabled person and you have all of your adaptive equipment, every accessibility need met, you're not going to think about your disability nearly as much as if there are absolutely no accommodations, like the fact that they had to move something to get me into an ADA room for this hotel. Like, of course, I'm standing at the desk going, okay, I'm now spending energy wondering if I'm going to have to navigate a non-ADA hotel room. It takes energy, and it takes energy away from things that we could be doing to live our authentic selves. Again, this is another reason why it's so important for us to be thinking about this with students, because often students are spending so much energy just navigating college. We don't want to provide additional barriers for them to spend more energy to engage with APO. So keeping in mind of the more marginalized a person is, the more energy they're expending on things other than just being a human. Right? And then from the actual research on this theory, a lack of salience seemed prevalent, particularly among those more privileged identity dimensions. So a cisgender white man who's Christian and is natively, American citizen, he doesn't have to think about any of those things on a regular basis. So his idea about saliency and the recognition of saliency in others might be much more rare, hesitant, not as easy to come up with when you just don't have to expend that extra energy to move throughout the world. So how do we take this understanding of our own identities, our own multiple dimensions as multidimensional human beings, and how do we apply this to understanding others and making space for others to be themselves. Ultimately, it's really about recognizing that no two people have the same experience. And there are systems set in place throughout this world, whether that's a formal system or an informal system, that purposely and accidentally provide more barriers to marginalized people. And where those systems overlap and provide barriers for more than one marginalized identity at a time, that's where we see intersectionality. You may have heard this term, it's a big buzzword in education, and it's often misused to be an explanation for the thing that I just finished explaining. Intersectionality is not that we all have different dimensions of identity and they overlap. Intersectionality is about the fact that systems create more marginalization for people who have more than one marginalized identity. So Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term in 1989, and she specifically was talking about the experience of Black women in the legal system. And that someone was trying to bring a discrimination case, and the court wanted to make her pick whether the discrimination was because she was a woman or because she was Black. And if she was a woman, there were plenty of other women at that company who weren't experiencing this discrimination. And there were plenty of Black men who weren't experiencing that discrimination. But because she was a Black woman, her experience was different than both of those groups. So that's really what intersectionality is about. That's what that's the thing we got to keep in mind when we're thinking about the ways in which we set up structures and systems in particular. How do people access resources for their chapter? How do people access the actual chapter meetings themselves, et cetera? And I just said all of that, but I said, oh, the other thing I would say is that, again, that identity is not additive, but simultaneous. So a person who is a woman, a person of color, and bisexual, those aren't separate things. They don't experience those things separately. They experience them simultaneously. So that person could never not be a bisexual woman of color. They can't just pick one. They might have to pick the expression of one in particular spaces. But whatever those identities are, that is our experience. And that's why so many people have such different experiences. Even people with the same list of identities can have drastically different experiences because of that context, that circle around the model of dimensions of identity. That context makes a difference on how we experience the world. Maybe someone came out when they were 13 and their parents are like, cool, how can I help you? Hurt you? Support, I think is where I was trying to go, but it came out with an H. Anywho. And then their friend in the same class, in the same grade, in the same neighborhood comes out to different parents. And even if their parents are like, okay, but doesn't go out of their way to be actively supportive, or just can't quite wrap their mind around the fact that gender identity and sexual orientation are two different things, that can have an impact on their experience, and therefore it's different than that first student. So yeah.
So like with that, you would say that like somebody that's trying to be neutral towards like somebody with a, like say they come out as they, them pronouns. So somebody that's just trying to be neutral and like, okay, I accept that, is very different from somebody that's going to go out of their way to support it.
It absolutely can be. And you know, neutral is not the worst of the options, clearly.
Yeah, it's a lot better than just.
But you know, if a parent goes, okay, fine, I'll use your pronouns, but never goes and researches what they can proactively do to support their kid, never reaches out to other parents of kids who have the similar identities or experiences, that's going to have an effect. Because if that parent is out actively seeking resources, being proactively supportive, they're going to find resources that other kid may never have had access to otherwise. Yeah.
Can I add? I mean, it's kind of different than someone being like, oh, cool, like, you like red, and then they never get you anything that's red.
Right.
Versus like, oh, you like red. It's like, I've been giving you gifts that are red, right? When someone cultivates a personality trait or a passion you have, right? Like, it's developing something really, really positive versus just like a thing of who you are, and there isn't that like celebratory aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that just has such a different impact in how you feel about those identities and things.
There's a great TED Talk by Ash Beckham who I highly recommend. And she talks a lot about, yeah, we had her at UD for, yeah, I'm sure you have, because I know you. And she has a couple of great TED Talks. One is like having difficult conversations coming out of the closet, but her second TED Talk is talking about duality and this sense of, if you don't care that I'm gay, then you don't care about me, because it's a part of my experience. It colors the way in which I engage in the world. And if you don't care about that aspect of me, you just want to treat me as Ash, regardless of gay, then you're missing a huge chunk of who Ash is. So again, thinking about that it's not enough to like, okay, I now know this fact about you, but what do you do with that information? So the other thing that intersectionality helps us understand is that all forms of oppression and marginalization are connected. I gotta tell you, fat phobia is rooted in white supremacy because of the way that it was designed to police Black women's bodies in particular, and to ostracize and to make fun of and to separate. And that separation has bled into how we treat all bodies, right? So anytime you look at different aspects of marginalization and oppression, you can always connect the dots to some other type of marginalization. Healthcare. So we've got ability, and it can be really challenging to access resources if you're disabled or if you have a particular medical condition. And that is also connected to socioeconomic privilege and oppression, right? Your ability, whether or not you have money, affects whether or not you have easy access to care. So what do we do with this information? That was a lot, right? That was a lot. Any questions before we go to action about identity, intersectionality?
I know this is going to be like a long answer question,
Sure.
but if you can give me like a short answer.
I will do my best.
Well, just because I'm sure you could talk about this for an hour. But
I really could.
About the, you said something about fat phobia is rooted in white supremacy and Black women's bodies being policed. What did that mean? I've never heard that.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate you.
Like, I've heard the connection between the white supremacy and the fat part, but I haven't heard that left.
So when you think about the history of white supremacy and the policing of Black bodies is slavery. Like, that's where it started. And the policing was keeping them separate, keeping them compliant, keeping them apart. It was designed to subjugate. And that didn't just magically disappear when slavery ended. So the policing of particularly Black women's bodies, research shows now that young Black women are more likely to be perceived as sexually at a much younger age than white young girls. And once you are perceived as being a sexual creature, then we get into all of the other gender bias and sexual violence risk, just because someone perceives your body as being more advanced than if they looked at a different type of body at the same age. That helped. Yeah. It was the shortest answer that I think I could give. But if you want to talk about it more, definitely, because I love talking about this. Any other questions? I'm going to check my time because, again, I can talk about this for a while. Oh, did my phone die? No. Okay.
You've got like 10 minutes. Cool.
Thank you. All right. So what do we do about it? So this is where we apply this to the thing we love best, at least in this room right now, APO. And it really is about taking action. You know, it's one of the things that Gen Z really loves to do is learn something and go, oh, I'm going to raise awareness. I'm going to put it on social media. I'm going to share it. That technically is an action, but it's not a particularly fruitful action. So helping our students, not only helping ourselves, but helping our students understand, what does actual action look like? And in my professional sphere, I go through the lens of allyship, and I use ally as a verb. I use it as an action. So from GLSEN, which is the preeminent LGBTQ+ educational setting resource, their definition of allyship is it's about taking demonstrable action, supporting members of a group with which you do not identify. So it's about supporting someone proactively that has a different experience than you because of different aspects of identity because of intersectionality. And then in my master's research, it was evidently the first allyship research that actually focused on allyship from the perspective of LGBTQ plus people and not just asking allies why they ally. Go figure, we should actually ask the people who this affects. But one of the students in my study talked about what allyship felt like to her. And she said, you're not just observing from the side, you're stepping into our lives and being with us and trying to understand. That's not only action, but it's relationship. And we can't do real beneficial action if we're not building the relationships, if we're not listening, if we're not seeking to understand how that other person's experience is different because they navigate the world in a way, or they have to navigate the world in a different way than we do. So action and relationship. So again, I use ally as a verb. And we hear this a lot, particularly in the LGBTQ plus community. The LGBTQ plus community has kind of like a corner on the ally as a word market, but allyship is for everyone and every identity. But we often hear that ally is a verb, do something, and then we continue to use it as a noun. And I'm like, that's not very helpful. So let's use it as a verb. So instead of me asking, are you an ally? I'm going to ask you, how do you ally? What are you doing? What allyship actions are you able to take? What was the last time you did an allyship action? I would probably venture to say most of you who probably did one, at least today, if not yesterday, because APO, we love to serve. And service is one way that we ally. So some of the things that can prevent us from doing those allyship actions, sometimes we recognize that we have a privilege and it makes us feel really guilty. Because it's sad when we realize that somebody has extra barriers or it is experiencing suffering because of something that's not their fault. It's just how this world was created. And that can be paralyzing. But it's really important to remember that the action is the important part. So what do we do about it? It can be really uncomfortable to step into situations and say that this isn't right, you need to change. But for us around this table at chapters, we have to, because students can't be, we can't guarantee that students are gonna know the right or have the confidence to confront their peers. We hope that they do. We wanna educate and empower them to do that. But for those of us as alumni volunteers, it's our responsibility that if we see something that's wrong, if we see somebody being harmed, intentionally, unintentionally, systemically, whatever, that's when we have to step in. So it can be uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. But also as an alumni volunteer, you probably each have had one situation where you're like, no, that we're not doing that. You can be turn into the scary alum who's just, we're gonna do it this way instead, yeah? That's the kind of hat you need to wear when we're seeing these kinds of interactions. Fear of stigma of association. This is thankfully decreasing specifically for LGBTQ plus identities because it's cool to be an ally now. But it's something that if you are just kind of hesitant to be in spaces with particularly marginalized identities or experiences, so maybe you're the only standing person in a room of people who are all in wheelchairs, if that just makes you feel weird, that's a good cue as to let you know that you have some stuff to explore. Why am I uncomfortable in this space? What is it that I don't want to associate with and why? So that's just a cue for more self-exploration. Fear of saying or doing something wrong. You're gonna say and do something wrong. Like I can't tell you it's not gonna happen because it will happen. Because again, no two people have the same experience. So what allyship actions work for one person? Again, you go to another person with the same list of identities with a slightly different experience, that allyship action might be harmful. So we're gonna mess up. We're gonna cause harm. We're gonna say the wrong thing. But what matters is what we do after that. When we make a mistake, can we acknowledge that what we said or what we did was not ideal? Can we acknowledge that it wasn't the right thing for that person or in that moment? And can we say, I am so sorry. I hold myself accountable for that. I will do better. Let me go do some more research. Let me appropriately ask non-strangers how to be better at this. anecdote for later. But also feelings of not knowing enough about marginalized experiences. We will never know everything. This is my literal job, and there is no way I will know everything in order to ally perfectly in every situation. It's just not possible. And for those of us who have that privilege again, it's those blind spots. So we don't know until we know. And so if we're fearing not knowing enough, then we're never going to act, right? And then one that I have a feeling will probably resonate in this room, feelings that one can't give enough effort or energy, that we can't do it all. And we can't do it all. But what we can do is what we can do, right? The disability community has this metaphor of spoons. Has anyone heard the spoons metaphor? Okay. So the spoons theory is that any given day, each person wakes up with a number of spoons, and spoons equal energy. And for someone who is able-bodied, maybe one spoon is all it takes to get up, get dressed, get showered, brush your teeth, get dressed, get out the door. For someone who's disabled, getting out of bed might be one spoon, brushing their teeth might be a spoon, getting in the shower might be one spoon, washing their hair might be one spoon, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time they've done the same thing that someone who's able-bodied has spent one spoon on, they've done 12, and now they've got, a quarter of the spoons that they originally had before they woke up. So we all have different levels of available energy. So all we can do is what we have the capacity to do. And that's another reason why ally as verb is so important. It's because if you can't do that thing because you don't have the skills, the expertise, the ability, the energy, you don't need to beat yourself up over that. Just do what you can when you can, right? It's all about those specific actions. If you see something you can do it. So now transitioning to chapter life. When we think about the life of our chapters, there's pretty much everything that we encounter is an opportunity to be more inclusive, more diverse, and more accessible. So when we think about all of these things, let's start with recruitment. What are some diversity, inclusion, and accessibility things that you think about with recruitment? What might come up? What might be barriers for people to access APO?
Physical location,
Mhm.
or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on so many of our campuses are grandfathered into ADA because if the building was built before 1980, whatever, it does not have to be accessible. And then the compliance version of accessibility does not always match actual accessibility. There's a building, the Recplex, so the place where physical activity is done on the campus where I went to school, was built in 2006, well after ADA. And the accessible parking that is adjacent to the building is on one side on the second floor. And the main entrance and where everyone checks in is on the ground floor. And there's like this 1/4 mile long ramp. Fine, I can get down that. But anyone who's not in a powered wheelchair getting back up that, there is an elevator. So you can get into the elevator on the ground floor and you can get to the second floor, but you can't get to the exit without going through 2 locked doors. So again, compliance, yes. Real, not comprehensive. So it's not enough to go, well, we're holding it in an ADA approved place. You have to actually think about what would that accessibility be if someone were in a wheelchair, or maybe they're not in the wheelchair, but their stamina or their chronic pain means that on some days they've got 5 minutes to stand and that's it. And if it takes them 10 minutes to get to the room, that's going to be a problem, right? What other things about recruitment? So we talked about physical access.
Can I throw something in?
Yes, Maggie, please.
This is like my big pet peeve thing. My philosophy is that if you walk into a room and nobody looks like you, it's hard to stay in that room. Yep. And so what do you do until there's somebody in the room that looks like everybody? Does it become one of those spirals that can never be resolved? Mm-hmm. It's an oversimplification, but I think there actually is a fairly easy answer, and that is contact. If before somebody who walks in the room notices nobody looks like them, if you can get up to them, mm-hmm. we're APO, ask a simple question. My go-to is, what's your favorite service project? There's always going to be an answer for anybody who's in the APO realm, even if they're just thinking of joining. And whatever their answer is, you can come up with a comment. Oh, I've never done that. That sounds fun. Tell me about it. Or, oh, I love that, whatever. And then suddenly you and that person are focusing on what you have in common, not what is different. And that is my greatest tip for recruiting for diversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Personal connection and connecting with someone on an individual basis is what led us mostly all into the fraternity anyway. So many people go to a service project with a friend, or I had a crush on someone who I couldn't say no to, and he made me pledge, and I did. And now I'm here.
It worked out.
It did. It worked out. So, you know, some kind of connection. So there are ways that you can utilize the resources that your campus offers. Most campuses have a diversity and inclusion office of some kind, whether that's for the entire institution or just student affairs or student development. Those are really great resources, not only to connect with people who might want to join, but also to get information about how to be more proactively inclusive on your campus. So making sure that the room, if you can't make sure that the room is visibly diverse, then making those connections and making sure people, especially at recruitment events, are there to make connections with people who walk in the door. Yeah.
I think it's easy to forget about things that aren't as obvious as things like rooms. It's like making sure you have a lot of variety. Like Wittenberg is very dog heavy.
Yeah.
So like there were always dogs. Me and big dogs don't get along. Me and all dogs, allergies. Great issues. I still love dogs.
Right.
When they're not giant.
Right.
But so like if you walk into something and there's always something like that there, or like every service project is based around something physical that somebody can't do.
Exactly.
Or every fellowship is just based around talking to people, like making sure you have that variety.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I literally ran from Lucia the first, like 3 times I saw her.
Was it a 4-paws dog? Yeah.
Because I was just traumatized by a giant Dalmatian as a child. So like, if a
Dalmatians.
dog is bigger than my knees, I am weary.
Understandable. I'm glad you've gotten to know 4-paws dogs though, because that can ease.
As long as they don't jump on me, my brain is like, this is not the giant.
And none of them should.
Yeah.
So I know we're running low on time. So I want to offer, again, throughout the rest of this weekend, if you have specific things that with chapters that you're working with that you want to explore, please, I'm here. This is what I love doing. This is what I love talking about. So I'm happy to help brainstorm. I'll also just put in a couple of notes. So we talked about physical access, financial access is another thing. Not all of your fundraisers should come from the pockets of your brothers. Most of your fundraisers should not come from the pockets of your brothers. One that is particularly challenging in our current climate is ideology. And there are ideologies that are not as welcoming to radical inclusion as others. And if you say that that's not okay, then they will also cry, but you're not being inclusive to me. So just be aware of that. It's not a huge thing in APO, but I have seen it. The other thing that I really want to highlight is under this umbrella of well-being and neurodivergence. So many of our students experience some really terrible things before they get to us. Whether that, I don't know why I'm crying. Oh my gosh. Probably because I'm thinking of like 2 students in particular, but whether or not they experience something terrible when they are with us or before us, we do have to be sensitive to the backgrounds of people. So specifically, I'm talking about sexual violence. So warning, prepare yourself. And so being able to give those notes of if that's something you're going to be talking about, let people know as well in advance as you can. Put in an agenda. If you're going to have a domestic violence shelter come and talk, let people know before they get there. I was sitting in an exec meeting once, and someone was talking about an example of when they were in college and one of their friends had experienced sexual assault, and there was a student who was not prepared to hear that, and she needed to leave the room. So trying to avoid that, but in that situation, what can you do to support that student, right? So being aware. Neurodivergence that was the other identity. I am ADHD, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 36. Like, it explains so many things. But the ways in which our brains work, there's so many different ways between autism, ADHD, other learning disabilities that are called learning disabilities, but if we just actually paid attention and gave kids what they needed in an educational environment, probably wouldn't be a disability, but that's another conversation. So being aware of the different ways in which people process information, might become overstimulated, might need more stimulation. So for instance, if I wasn't typing away notes, then I would have to be knitting so that my hands had something to do. So being aware of being inclusive of that might look like the weird kid in your chapter, because we all have the weird kid, right? We all have one. But why is that kid considered weird? Is it because their brain works differently? Is it because they had different experiences? Whether that's just never really learning the learned social skills of how to make small talk, because not everybody learns how to ask about the weather.
Or make friends.
Exactly.
One of my chapters who like thought you make friends by like, oh, we can drink together, and I'm of age, and it's creepy.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just like, hey, I have a thing that I heard people like.
Mm-hmm.
Can we be friends?
Mm-hmm. That also goes into well-being is how many of your unofficial events revolve around alcohol. And we're seeing more and more incoming students who either are in recovery or have family members who are in recovery. And so there has to be alternatives to connecting and fellowship that do not revolve around alcohol. So just being aware of that. Also, just a logistic thing, dietary needs are a thing. There are people who are vegan, people who have celiac, people who are vegetarian, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, like if you know that someone in your chapter has a peanut allergy, don't serve peanut butter ever. Like just try not to. So just being aware of those things. So on this last screen, I just want to give you my contact information. It's pretty simple to remember. It's laura@howdoyoually.com. So I'm asking you how you ally, and that's my email address. We, as a fraternity, also now have a national program chair for diversity and inclusion. Candace is awesome. She's a great resource. So diversity.chair@apo.org. And again, so you can reach out to either of us. Maggie also has some fantastic connections and resources and has been around the block long enough to know and to have been along the journey of APO in inclusion over a trajectory of years. So if you have, but like, we didn't have women until 1976. I mean, come on.
That is one of the nicest ways I've been called old in a long time, Laura. I thank you. Very nice.
I mean, I'm the oldest one in the physical room, so I'm there. I get it. But age is important, and age is also another thing that we have to keep in mind, because not all of our students are going to be 18 to 22. We want the students who are not just 18 to 22. The more different students we have, the better and stronger our chapters will be. So I know I've gone, oh, well, it's time for the next one. But if you have any questions, I'm here for the rest of the weekend. And again, you can reach out to me anytime. If you have a particular situation that might be sticky, I don't report to anybody. I know I'm not a mandatory reporter anymore. I will counsel you on whether you should report. I will do that. But if you have any questions, please definitely let me know. Cool. Thank you, Maggie, for coming. I'm glad you joined us.
I am too. Thank you for allowing me. And actually, if you've got a minute, I actually do. I want to let everyone in the room do it, but I do have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's let everyone in the room get their shot in first.
Well, we're still waiting for Connor to come next. So the next person isn't even in here yet. So you're good.
Okay. Well, I am, because I'm the Pledge Plus namesake, I get to put a challenge out. And the challenge that I have selected, the theme, and it's not been rolled out yet, so you guys are getting a bit of a preview, is Better Together, the change starts with me.
I like it.
Thank you. And actually, Candace helped me come up with it, because Candace is one of my kids.
Nice. That makes
She's a
sense.
volunteer I got to work with as a student, so I'm thrilled. I love her. And I've got 3 areas that I'm focusing on. They
Mhm.
are accessibility, justice, and gender equity.
Awesome.
And what I would love to do, you gave me some good things to think about. I would love the opportunity, if you don't mind, to shoot you a copy of it. I've been having all kinds of people reviewing it to make sure that it's impactful, that I'm not being condescending on the racial justice part. I don't want to come across as the great white hope. I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to be insulting. And I've also given it to a lot of people who are similarly aged to the college students as well, to make sure that because I'm an old broad, but you know, I would love, I think you are somebody who could have some good impact, especially since apparently 2 of the 3 pillars I'm looking at apply to you. And I want to make damn sure I'm being respectful, not talking down to anybody. So I've got Laura at howdoyally.com. Do you mind if I send it
Please
to
do.
you?
Please do.
If you, sorry if it's I'm a bit of a tight deadline. If you could get it back to me by Monday.
No problem. I mean, you're lucky. I basically belong to a conference this weekend. And so I've got
Excellent. All right, I will send it to you and welcome any input. And the only thing that'll piss me off is if you're too polite. If
Okay,
you get
noted.
something you're afraid of, oh, I don't wanna, that'll piss me off. I wanna know if my tone is bad, or if I've got anything wrong, or if I picked sample organizations that are not good.
I am confident in my tact skills to say whatever needs to be said.
Well, I like to surround myself with people who will tell me to go to hell when they think I need to hear it, because at times we all need to hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah, for
So,
sure. Definitely.
All right.
Thank you.
Awesome. I enjoyed this. Thank you. Really good.
Thank you.
I'll send that to you in the next couple of minutes. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna end the meeting and we'll get going. All right, so I'm gonna stop share and I'm just gonna leave.